What a way to start a podcast. I'm just going to mention the title of the book, Facing the Truth of Your Life, by Merle Yost, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist. I think most people would probably walk right by this book in the self-help section, yet Merle Yost has created a book that is readable with short chapters and interesting insights, coping skills, and shifts in perspective that could help anyone. He is a full-time writer, speaker, and consultant. He is retired from 25 years of psychotherapy, and he gives talks now so people can, in his words, make sense of their lives and the pain they are in so they can move forward. With over 35 years of personal and professional work, Merle has taken the summary of experience and training, and he uses it to help others. So in this interview, we're going to talk about his efforts to help people through his books and his speaking, and you're going to get a preview of his book, Facing the Truth of Your Life. All right, let's get to the interview. But first, if you are looking for billing services, check out Therapist Billing Services. That's therapistbillingservicesllc.com, the first billing service made by therapists for therapists. I would highly recommend it instead of going with some of the larger entities that attract you with low prices at first, and then eventually you find out what the fees are. Check it out, therapistbillingservicesllc.com. All right, here we go. Welcome to the podcast, Merle Yost LMFT. I'm so glad that you are my guest today on The Intentional Clinician.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, and I think we're going to dive right in to me putting you in the hot seat because your book has a brave title with the newest book, Facing the Truth of Your Life.
Yes.
And I have to say, I've been reading it, and I will say this on camera. I'm keeping this on my desk because it covers so many concepts that clients are going through, people are going through, and it simplifies them and summarizes them in very short chapters. It's about 300 pages, which sounds intimidating, but it's not like The Hobbit or something like that. You can understand this. It's written in a relatable and I obviously think you collaborated with folks to kind of maybe take some of your clinical language. You must have, I think, or else you did it to make it readable to your average person. Is that what happened? Or?
Yeah, I had some people read it mostly about the concepts, and they really triggered a lot of people, and I got a lot of feedback. And but in terms of the language, that's really me. It's just how I talk.
Oh,
and so it's just Merle.
That's great. And I mean, I've already read your bio, so people know that you're retired from private practice, but now you're lecturing, consulting, writing books, these sort of things. And well, that's interesting. I guess we can just go there. But what is some of the feedback? Why are people getting triggered by this book? I'm actually confused because I thought it was great.
Well, I would say there are three major ones. One is my anti-self-love concept and women in particular are ready to burn me at the stake.
Oh goodness. Okay.
Because they're so committed to self-love, and I think it's a really bad concept, and I take it apart. The other one is on forgiveness. That triggers a lot of people. The more religious they are, the more often that absolutely sends them off the deep end. And then my favorite one is the victim identity disorder, which because of what the society has turned into the contest of who can be the biggest victim, and are missing really the point.
I see. Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting because all of these takes, I think if you actually read through the book, actually are empowering to people because you're just okay, right? I feel like you're taking you're just kind of taking a slightly different perspective on something that could be healthy. a healthy thing for somebody. And I think you're putting your spin on it, which I think is not in the norm of the mainstream. But I also think it's funny enough getting to this similar point, just different way of viewing it. Does that sound right?
Yeah, because we shorthand so many things and they become meaningless. And people then embrace them for whatever they want them to be, as opposed to thinking them through about what's really going on.
Right.
And so I broke down what was actually happening and then what was the cure or the better way to approach this that actually was far healthier. The thing that amazed me about the book is that I had a number of guys read this and they said it just stopped their sexual compulsivity. Because just changing the way that they were looking and holding themselves shifted the way they were in the world. And that's not an easy thing to shift.
No, and I do think I'm not sure what philosophy this lines up with completely, because you cover so many concepts, but it does remind me of a little bit of Stoicism, where this is a rough thing. Well, basically, like, I don't know what you call it, but basically, like, essentially you're saying, you're acknowledging all the things that happen to people, which cause them to be victims in the world, all the bad things, the way your parents programmed you, the way the culture fed you lies, all of that stuff is there. But in this book, you're really kind of practically going, okay, now what do we do about it? Right?
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing. That's what I was getting. And I feel like that is something that not everybody's ready in therapy to deal with. But I think you've been in therapy yourself and you were a therapist and you're like, all right, if you're ready to deal with it, let's do it. That's why it's called Facing the Truth of Your Life. That's my interpretation.
Yes, it is. I mean, I debated about the title for a long time, but that was the phrase that kept coming up for me as I was putting this together. I'm going, it's really doing that. And the victim identity disorder, I had 2 editors melt down completely. Because they saw them, they had never put the pieces together, and they saw themselves, and they were just in shock. And fortunately, one of them called me, and I was able to put him back together. But and the other one just fired me.
Oh goodness! Well, I think we might go there soon. But just to make sure our listeners don't turn this off, I want to point out something here. You were talking about what should I expect other than just another self-help book. And you said what's different about my book is that it's designed to help bring pain to the surface. So this is not going to be a fast read. It may bring up too much pain for your past or present. That is the point. If you cannot heal the pain, it will continue to haunt you. The path to freedom is to uncover the real you rather than to be stuck in the beliefs and pain of your past. And obviously, there's no guarantee this book will change your life. And of course, in the end, you actually, I read part of the end too. You discuss like, hey, like, I've laid out these concepts. If you're suffering from this sort of trauma and all that, you should get into therapy. But this book is a helper while you're in therapy as well. You talked about EMDR therapy and some other things as well. And essentially almost like a frame to try to make sense of why you are where you are. And I think that brings me to 2 concepts before I ask my next question, which is the concepts are, if someone gets some knowledge about who they are and what happened to them, then they can be empowered. But if you don't know why you suffered so much as a child, or had difficulty with friends, or acted out, and you don't know why, then you keep making up stories about it. And these stories lead to, possibly in my mind, maladaptive patterns, and possibly even horrible symptoms, because you keep going over the same story, which is actually not a fully true story. It's a subjective story. And so I feel like what this book is doing is it's trying to crack people's stories open so that they can go, wait a minute, I am more than whatever this symptom is. I am more than a victim. I am a person who deserves respect. I'm a person who deserves to have my voice heard, and I deserve to be able to set boundaries. That's what I was reading, kind of really, really kind of empowering and saying, let's take a hold of this. Let's not go through life just being like, look at me, I'm poor me, I've been screwed so many times. It's like, okay, yeah, you've been screwed. How do I help you with that? You're in the point of what I would call, if we were going through the stages of change, called
preparing for action. You're not in the pre-contemplation stage.
No.
You know, where, you know, some of those books where it's like, you poor baby, read my book, your parents suck, the world sucks. That's pre-contemplation, right? And towards the end of the book, they say, but you might be able to do something about it. And then contemplation is, you know, these books about like starting to set boundaries, or, you know, starting to make better habits, atomic habits, you know, like that's contemplation. I'm ready to start looking at these concepts that could help me be better. Yours is like, all right, we're almost to action stage here. We know that the life can suck. The world can be brutal. People are programming you and lying to you. Now what? You know, that's kind of what I was getting. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's the whole point of facing the pain if you aren't going to do something about it.
Right.
I mean, granted, we have made suffering an art form in our society. Oh, I'm such a victim. Can't you pity me? Can't you just take care of me? And I don't ever have to take responsibility for anything ever in my life. And that's just a fast road to misery and death. And I always felt that people came to me to get better. and only a certain, and while I think empathy is a nice thing, but I think it gets overdone very quickly. Sorry. And I actually wanted people to get better, and the people who wanted to get better stayed, and the people who didn't left. It just saved them a lot of money and me a lot of time. So I really, my background is in Buddhism and in Gestalt, and I'm a humanistic therapist, and this is a very humanistic approach to life. And I spent 19 years in my own personal therapy, and then 2 years in a Gestalt Institute, and doing really intense deep work there, and all the other stuff that I've done, and had amazing therapy and supervisors who beat the crap out of me. And so and figuring out that the world doesn't know most of this, and they are stuck in these old paradigms of being a victim, or around self-love or forgiveness, or all these other things that I challenge, and not realizing that there's a way to do this that isn't about killing yourself.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's ringing true. The Gestalt and the Buddhism concepts, because, and I only know some things about Buddhism, so I don't want to put my foot in my mouth. Maybe you can. But when people are trying to, in the old Buddhist Zen master stories, when they were trying to attain nirvana or get to the next level of their teaching, oftentimes the teacher would poke at them or smack them with a stick or make them do some stupid mission of like going up a mountain getting water because they wanted their enlightenment to, and I don't know how to sum this up, but it was like they had to see the beauty and the pain of the world. That's two opposites, the beauty and the pain of the world. They had to see their own suffering. They had to accept the absurdity that they could never be perfect or pull off perfect Zen or perfect nirvana. And that's part of why you then become enlightened, or why you achieve the next level of your journey, is because you're laughing at yourself and you have a sense of humor, but that joins you with everyone else in a way, or joins you with all other living creatures or the world. Does that strike you?
Yeah. I mean, in Buddhism, we're all the same person.
Yeah.
We're all God. So to put in these arbitrary differences and make good and bad about a whole lot of things is just a way of separating people and diminishing. And once you really get that this is all kind of made up and that you can't take it all so seriously, it's just about being and experiencing, and the choice of being in this lifetime, and gaining deeper self-awareness. And it doesn't have to be painful. It should be. Curiosity is our greatest strength.
Aha! I saw that in here. I was reading that throughout, and that's maybe where the humanistic part comes through, like accepting who you are and what you are. And that's what I feel like the book is really trying to do in the first section or the first part of the book. And I'm gonna ask you about chapter 4, but let's go real quick. I'm gonna talk to the people out here who are like, what is they talking about? So in the book, part 1 is reframing your life, and you talk about meaning, what is self, going deeper. You talk about happiness, compassion, empathy, how to love yourself or not love yourself, which that's the triggering chapter.
Yeah, the big one.
Your take on that. But I feel like what you're doing is really trying to help people make meaning out of the mess of the culture and the weird things that they don't even realize they believe unconsciously, which are causing them more pain. Part 2, and you can comment. Does that sound about right? I mean, I'm not trying to summarize your whole book.
No, I think you're doing fine.
Part 2 is when you really dig in.
It's the hard one.
Digging into, I would say, our own bullshit, which is when you've been hurt and when you've been wrong, we get defensive and we like to blame people and we like to hold on to stuff. And you really, and this is the part I haven't read all of it, but you really kind of challenge that. And say, is this worth your time and energy to act like this?
Yeah, what's the payoff of this investment? And it's very little to non-existent and quite negative often. So
right, and you give a lot of solutions. So I'll point that out. I don't want to spoil that for everyone. Part 3 seems to be you call it walking through the darkness. And I'm not sure about that, but for me, that seems like you're facing your fear, your shame, all of the pain you've been stuffing down. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes. Yeah, because we talk about feeling shame, but we don't really understand what shame is. We have all this pain that we don't really understand what it is. And the first step is owning the pain. The second step is figuring out what it's really about. And then you can do something about it.
Right. I hear this passion that you have for people, that you really are just wanting them to get out of these patterns and stories that they've told themselves that keep them depressed or anxious or in a perpetual victim state.
Yeah, there's no advantage to being in pain. I mean, granted, as I often say to my clients, there's more fun ways to be masochistic. This is not it.
There's the humor part. I like that. I like part 4. You talk about the impact of childhood and how that shapes you, and also how to raise healthy children by not lying to them about life was a lot of it.
Or who their parents are.
Right? Being honest about who you are. I'm not trying to summarize the whole book, but then you kind of bring it together. But throughout the book, while you introduce these concepts, you give little ideas. So I wanted to go to chapter 4 in the first section, rethinking happiness. And I thought this was an important concept, and I want to have you comment on it. But you quote a lot of famous folks in here. So I can't even say his name. Gandhi. I don't know his first name. I don't know how to say his first name, but Gandhi said, happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. Can you explain what you think about that quote?
Well, it's being authentic and it's being honest. I mean, those are the two words that come up because most people are completely inauthentic. We have created a civilization that is about trying to be what the other person wants you to be or what you think they want you to be in order to be accepted, to be loved, to not be hurt. And what we've done is created a whole lot of people who don't even know who they are. So they don't have any authenticity because they're so focused on over there and the response that they're getting that they're disconnected from what's going on inside of them.
Yes. Yeah. And the coping skills that you talk about here that are negative would be the people that get stuck in doing, that get lost in endless busy pursuits of experiences or sensation or what's next or what am I going to do or work or
all those distractions, the distractions from self.
Right. So and then in our society, we're almost rewarded from disconnecting from our emotions and empathy.
Well,
You often hear, certain people and companies make a lot more money when they cut their workforce and slash and burn and gut companies rather than trying to slowly rebuild them or tend to them.
Yeah, that's that's one of my pet peeves.
That's a pet peeve. Okay.
It's really as these people who come in and raid and take over companies and destroy them, and we've lost so many really good companies out there who needed help and putting it back together as opposed to being destroyed, and we've hurt a lot of people along the way as a consequence.
Right, and unfortunately people get rewarded monetarily for this behavior.
Yeah,
and that's part of our society as well, is how do you make a living. You also talk about the distraction of pride and how we need to celebrate accomplishments, but not really think that this
is who we are.
Yeah, like who we are, and like this is like the pinnacle of my life, right? Like this experience is something that will pass, right?
Yeah, well, everybody's interested in how many medals they can pin on their chest.
Right.
Because they become a deflection from who they really are.
Aha. So we keep going down this path of getting, I don't want to say it like in a cheesy way, but almost you're kind of encouraging people to like get to know who you really are by taking off the trappings of the culture and what stories you're telling yourself. But if you get to know who you really are, then you actually have to deal with your pain, which is a big section of this book. And we all have pain and grief, right?
Oh, well, nobody gets through childhood unscathed.
Right.
It wasn't designed that way.
Right.
It's just not. Pain is part of what makes us who we are.
Yes.
And it makes us feel things in a real way. And so many of these distractions are about avoiding feeling that pain. I mean, I grew up in a cult. And we weren't allowed to have real social life of the world. We couldn't tell people who really are. It's over the top. I mean, my mother believed that she was ruler of the world and sat on the right hand of God, and she was the focus of all of this. And I was brutally raped by my father, and for 3 years as a child. And this was not a fun childhood.
No, does not sound good.
And I can go on for hours about that. But so I wrote this book from the place of knowing that you can survive and even heal and thrive having gone through this enormity. But the only way to do that is to own it and go back through it and heal it. Because otherwise you're simply an open wound and trying to keep people from poking that open wound your whole life. And then so you're lost.
And so I think it's interesting because you're right. This whole point is countercultural. Yes. In the United States, almost every product that we're told is going to make your life better, more comfortable, safer, more nutritious, live longer, avoid your feet hurting, avoid your back hurting, get this new pillow, get this new this. Or this new app will save you all this time. You won't have to struggle. It's kind of like this illusion of a sort of a heaven on earth type thing, bought by your money. And I don't want to go too off into that, but essentially countercultural is the acceptance, an Eastern mindset, which is the Buddhist acceptance, is life is inherently, you're going to suffer.
It's all suffering, yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I think Jack Kornfield wrote a good book. He wrote a book about Buddhist psychology where he kind of takes the Buddhist concepts and tries to put them into psychological. And one of the things he talks about is fame and blame, like highs and lows. You're going to experience all that as a person. And if your expectations are that life is supposed to be fun and happy and everything gets better and like a Disney movie, right? Although Disney movies do have the parents dying at the beginning, which is usually more realistic. But essentially, this happy ending trope is not accurate. And if your expectations are in alignment, then you will be able to deal with these issues more.
Yeah, two comments. Well, a psychologist friend of mine read the book and said, "You're out to destroy American civilization." Said pretty much. But I guess the simplest way for me to address all that is that if we go back to the 12-step paradigm, and I have my issues with 12-step, but that's a whole nother discussion. But the paradigm is that you have to accept who you are before you can do anything about it. And that really is the core of this, is that you have to accept that this shit happened to me. I had to accept that I grew up in a cult. I had to accept that my father sexually abused me. I had to accept that most of the stuff that I grew up in was completely fucking nuts. And so then I had to go search out what that truth was for me. And I went to my very first therapy session. I sat there with a therapist and we were talking, and she said, "You seem a little nervous. Are you afraid of me?" I said, "No." She looked at me and said, "What are you afraid of?" I said, "What's inside of me?" And I think that's true for most people. I think they're afraid of what's inside of them, but I found a place where I could unpack that fear. And that's what therapy's supposed to be, I think. And unfortunately, far too many people, therapists, in my opinion, are too busy trying to put a quick fix on something and send them back out to the war instead of hold the space where you can truly sink in and be naked and truly seen and get the healing of being naked and not rejected. So then things can absolutely change.
Yes, that's a very important point, I think. That, and I think I've seen this in many different therapy paradigms are saying the same thing. You know, like Jung talked about dealing with your shadow, and that your shadow will never go away. You're always going to have your shadow, right? And the shadow is those dark impulses or those secrets or those things we try to hide. And there's so much more to that. That was a very gross summary. But in an EMDR, right, in trauma, when people have PTSD, one of the symptoms of PTSD is avoidance of anything that reminds you of the abuse or whatever you witnessed that was horrific, that you're now having bad nightmares about or flashbacks about. And then when the people actually address it in the therapy, bring up the horrible things while they feel, emotionally distraught for a little while, they end up feeling better over the time.
Yes.
But whereas the avoidance of that truth or saying it out loud, what really happened, is actually causing them more pain because it's continuing some sort of horrible cycle of stuffing your emotions or avoiding your emotions,
medicating them,
drinking them away, smoking them away.
And
that causes physical problems. And we've seen that in the ACEs study, which people can look that up. But physical problems happen when your emotional life is not in line with your thought life and your physical life. And that's kind of what that quote was about.
They're somaticizing their pain.
Right.
I mean, I'm a somatic therapist. So, I mean, it's just matter. And so okay, that's an interesting feeling there. Let's find it in your body. Now let's go dig into that and see where it takes you. And so they're like, oh, here he goes again.
Well, and that can be scary, right? Especially.
Well, of course it is.
Yeah.
That's why we have to create, as a therapist, a safe environment. And that also means the therapist having done their own work, because too many therapists are avoiding their clients going into pain because they can't face their own pain. So they don't know whether the clients can survive that or not because they haven't figured out if they can.
Oh, I like that. I love calling out therapy. No, that's true. And the fact that you're able to speak openly about what people would say is probably a very traumatic childhood of growing up in a cult and being sexually assaulted by your own parent, that shows me that you have said it enough and done enough work on it that it's not triggering you right now. You seem totally...
No, it's just the truth of my life. And I had to come to terms with all that. I mean, I had a recluded memory over the sexual abuse. What my father did to me was beyond horrific, and it was actually in my first EMDR training, the very first training. I went to the training, And I was trained by Francine Shapiro back in 1993. So I go way back to the beginning of this.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I've done this a long time. And they told us to pick something in the practice section. They told us to pick something, a small T trauma, not a big T trauma. They didn't want to open up a can of worms.
Right.
And I couldn't think of anything. So the only thing that occurred to me was that I had this phobia of tall buildings. I'd look up at a tall building and just about pass out. And what we now know is that phobias are often a cover for trauma.
Yes.
And so I didn't know this at the time. It's green as grass. And so we about 30 seconds we did the setup. 30 seconds in doing the bilateral stimulation. All of a sudden, my head went back, a cock went down my throat, and I was completely dissociated.
Oh, wow.
It was the beginning of the occluded memory starting to clear, at least to some degree.
Yeah.
So that was how that all. I had all the symptomology. I was sexually compulsive. I was doing all these things, but we couldn't figure out what was going on. And then in that one EMDR session, it blew it wide open.
Yes, and I see that this is the interesting thing about your book, because you've got all these concepts of structural, almost like cognitive behavioral ways of understanding things, but you're combining it completely with somatic,
yes,
and Gestalt and humanistic and these sort of like what I would call advanced therapy techniques, which is hard to do, because when I was reading it at first, I said, wow, he's really boiled this down, and it's like talk about the thoughts and behaviors, but then you have a ton of stuff about trauma in here. So I guess what I'm saying is that you clearly have done eclectic work, because you can't boil this book down to one thing, except for, are you ready to take this?
Heal.
To heal, right? Are you ready to do this? Because if you are, this is a preparing for action/action book. And I feel like that's well needed in our society. I wanted to talk about self-acceptance, which is an interesting chapter, to love or not love myself, which apparently this triggered people. But I do feel like you wrote some things that are in line with what, a lot of people say. You wrote, self-acceptance is the opposite of self-hatred. We learn to accept ourselves and not hate ourselves by taking in love from our parents and by owning who we are. Taking in unconditional love initiates self-acceptance. Without unconditional love, when love is always conditional with an if, self-hatred and shame are bred, none of which will lead you to self-worth or self-respect. Self-hatred blocks you from knowing yourself and prevents you from being truly known by others. Accepting who you are can release the blocks and progress of your life. So, but then down here, you identify, so that part seems very in line with most teachings, but here's I think where you're triggering everybody. Self-love, like a balloon, can inflate the ego, but with nothing tangible, nothing of tangible substance. Without forming and solidifying your public self, you miss the first step towards interdependence with the world. The single-minded pursuit of self-love is a distraction. Our root self is about our connections to the world, how we recognize everyone as ourself. At the level of the root self, we do love everyone because we recognize that we are all the same person, drawing from the same universal energy. That's a very tough concept for people to get, but I agree with that. By extension, we do genuinely love ourselves, but this is a much higher level of functioning that few people reach. Universal love is the ultimate goal of many religions and spiritual traditions. It requires a lot of effort and patience to arrive at that level of enlightenment. To focus on self-love is to ignore the deficits in the love we did not get from our parents. To accept yourself is to accept your flaws, but it does not assume you are content with your flaws and shortcomings. Owning the shortcomings is the primary step in changing them. Now, you kept going. So I actually feel, I felt like it's interesting that triggered people, because I think what you were getting at is like, there's this movement of like self-love, love yourself, la da da, and that can, if you just focus on that, completely blind and distract yourself from your shortcomings.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
I've done a lot of I've done talks on this.
Okay.
And I trigger people like mad. I get things thrown at me, and but I start out the talk with I start rubbing myself, going, because people use self-love as a salve to soothe their pain, to make them feel better, but it doesn't change anything. It's just this self-masturbation, if I can be so crude, as to make you feel better in the moment, but nothing changes. And so, but self-acceptance is where the change happens. And that's when genuine self-caring, self-love, if you want to use those words, work, as opposed to this distraction from pain. And so it's just, yeah, I never expected it to have that much negative response. But and women therapists particularly often just go after me about this. How dare I challenge their self-love? It's authentic and genuine. It's like,
well, and I think that's where the I don't know. It's a weird concept because I also read the self-compassion studies by Kristen Neff, where if you do 5 minutes of self-compassion, but for me, self-compassion isn't self-love, it is self-acceptance.
No.
Because compassion is like, okay, I see you both in your brokenness and in what you're trying to do. I see how far you've come, but how far you have to go. Self-acceptance and self-compassion to me are similar, but compassion is a form of love where you're trying to accept yourself. Self-love, just as like this sort of, extreme concept, could just be like, well, I need to love myself and go get an ice cream sundae because I had a bad childhood, right? and that is toxic, and that goes along with what I call toxic positivity or toxic validation. And this is a tough thing for therapists out there. So a lot of therapists listen to this podcast, and let's go with this. There are clients that we see who have been brutally hurt by society and childhood and trauma and rape and all of these things. And some of them have gotten into this toxic self-validation, and they want you to validate them toxically, that all of their behaviors are essentially rationalized and justified because of whatever happened to me. And I
get a jail-free card.
And that is doing trauma a disservice. Because even though you were traumatized, my job is to get you to, first of all, get out of the PTSD, get through the depression, get through the anxiety. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is to help you transform how you live and how you're seen and how you relate to others in the world. Otherwise, I am harming you by letting you stay in a protective bubble that never changes your life. And that's hell. When you stay too protected and too comfortable and too away from people, and we're social creatures, right? We need to be able to find like-minded people to spend time with. Yeah. If I allow you to justify your behavior to stay out, that's the same thing. It's the equivalent. Here's what I'm going to say, and this, you tell me this is too extreme. I think that's the same thing as letting somebody who is addicted to alcohol or drugs rationalize their behavior, that they should continue to do that because life sucks and work is hard, so I need a six-pack every night.
It's true.
Now,
it's true.
Now, I'm not going to yell at that person. I know how to do motivational interviewing. I know how to accept them how they are. I'm not going to tell them to stop drinking. They know they need to stop drinking. And I would argue that the person with post-traumatic stress or trauma, they know that isolation and these poor coping skills, which may be self-love, like I'm going to eat 2 bags of popcorn every night because I had a bad childhood or whatever it is, food addiction or sex addiction or whatever, they know it's not good for them. They're not dumb. But they rationalize it, right?
Sheldon Kopp wrote a book called If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him. It's a very famous Buddhist quote. Mm-hmm. It's about not looking outside of yourself for the truth, that the truth is inside of you. Mm. And so if you're seeking the Buddha out there to give you all this wisdom, that you're missing the point, and because you have to go on that journey. But there's a quote in the book that says, real change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of changing. And the point of my book was to raise the cost of staying the same.
That's deep. So I'm going to make sure people come out of this not totally triggered, because I'm about to ask you about spirituality, but you said later on in the self-love chapter, which everyone hated you for, full acceptance of oneself takes you to a place of connectedness that has love for everything and everyone, accepting everyone's character flaws in their fullness, just as you have your own. Ultimately, you are here in this life to work on yourself and to love others. And I love that, because I feel that there are so many people that partially heal and they get partially better in therapy or whatever, but then they keep being completely offended, angry, resentful, vindictive about other people who have character flaws.
Yep.
And that is the shadow, because if you have not fully accepted in yourself, which funny enough, this whole chapter is about, then you cannot accept and love others. You will always keep them at arm's length, or you'll put the conditions on them. And
you stay judgmental.
Yes. And then, but the messed up thing is you want people to stop doing that to you because you had trauma.
Yeah. Because
you're not going to do that for others. That's like the golden rule, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. But people, as I said, I felt my job as a therapist was to increase the level of pain so that they would get better.
Well, the crazy part is that this came out way before EMDR. I don't know who came up with that, but Gestalt, I don't know where did you started doing this way before EMDR, because EMDR's concept is bring up the worst moment of your life, process it with bilateral stimulation, undo all of the negative cognitions you had around it, be able to understand, fully accept it. When you fully accept it, the PTSD symptoms seem to go away for most people.
Yes.
So that was in the 90s, in the early 2000s, and it's only in the last, 8 years that it's become popular in the public. Although completely misunderstood, because people think it's going to just like surgically remove trauma from their minds. But anyway, the point is, you were doing this way before. Where did you learn some of these concepts of bringing pain to the surface so that you could then heal, which is exactly what the body does. If I have shrapnel in me, my body is forming, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, different pus and things around it, different, nodules to try to push it out of my skin. If I get a cut, I need to clean that cut and get the pus out so that it can fully heal. And that's getting that nasty shit out of us. So how, if I get food poisoning, my body evacuates it from my body. Where did you learn this stuff?
Well, I think it was in my therapy. Because I was a mess.
Okay.
I was totally dissociated. I was sexually compulsive. I was eating way too much. I was doing all these things that were medicating the pain that I didn't even know, that because I had occluded memory, I didn't even know what a lot of the pain was. And so, but I could tell there was something wrong. And I guess growing up in the cult, but somehow I walked away with a belief that I'll tell that story. That I actually was supposed to do something, but I was so going around the drain with all of this weird behavior and pain that there was no way that I could accomplish anything. And there's this short story I'll tell. This is the one thing that I took away from my mother. I think it was the greatest gift for me, and she was crazy. It's an understatement of the year. Both my parents were off the wall in completely different ways, but we couldn't have been more than about 5 years old, if that. We went to the little tiny little town of 6,000 people in the Ozarks of Missouri, in the backwoods. And they had the Easter egg hunt. And so they had us all kids up lined there, and then they shot the gun, and everybody was running to get the eggs. And my mother screaming, "Don't go with them, go the other direction." Because if I were following the crowd, I wasn't going to get any of the good eggs. If I went the other way, I had the opportunity to find the eggs before they did. And so, in some way, that was if I had to take one thing from my mother, that was the greatest gift that she gave me, because I spent my whole life looking at the way, not the way everybody else was going, but looking at the way where I could find the truth.
Oh, that is such a wonderful story. Yeah.
So
that, and that's a concept you can talk about from recovery. You can talk about that so many ways. The idea that by following a crowd, you may be actually damaging your physical, emotional, and mental health. And because as humans, we're pod animals. We want to be with others, right? We want that connection. We want that belonging. We want that security. And oftentimes, when we didn't get that as children, we seek that from friends or workplaces or religion. And we have to be careful that while we are getting some needs met that are natural needs to be part of a support network, that we aren't giving up our autonomy, our freedom, our values, and what's important to us. So this being said, I sense a very high spiritual perspective from you, that you are able to see the world in this lens when you were treated so poorly, and when you were little. I mean, I know. I'm not saying
it's
you're
true.
a victim, but you were.
I agree. No, I won't argue with any of that. I mean, but as a Buddhist, and I'm not I call myself a spiritual Buddhist, is the best way to describe it. But as a Buddhist, I believe that I pre-planned all of this before I was born. And that this going through all of this and healing that was so that I could become the healer that I was to become. So I'm grateful that I went through that. Does that excuse them for their behavior? Because no, they had their free will as well. And they have to, and none of them were ever able or willing to face their actions and so forth, even though I confronted the shit out of them, as you might have guessed. And alienated my entire family. I essentially disowned my entire family because there was just no point, because they were so deep in this that it was just, there was no there. And that was part of my freedom. And I didn't do it out of hatred. I just did it because I was done.
Yeah.
I was just done. And I wrote them a letter that says, I'm done. I won't read your letters. I won't listen to your phone calls. I'm just done. Have a good life. So that's self-acceptance. That is accepting who I am, how I became me, and making the best me out of all of that, as opposed to wallowing in being a victim and wallowing in all of the self-defeating behaviors that came out of that, because they weren't helping me be the person that I was to be. And I like who I am. Am I in love with me? No. Do I think I have flaws? Absolutely. But I really like who I am, and I like and I'm proud of how I got here. I mean, it took a lot of work and a lot of pain and a lot of money to do all those years of therapy and all the work and all the different things that I've done. And I jumped headfirst in the New Age movement, and that was really the beginning of a lot of this as well. After I was influenced by my very first therapist, and it's been a journey. And I said that book was my gift. I did that after I stopped practicing. I went off to Mexico and I wrote most of the book while I was there. And I had this sweet kid that I ended up mentoring. He had been raised in a Christian cult and was trying to extract himself from a really toxic environment. And my book just triggered the hell out of him. And so he became my muse in a sense, because he would dig into the forgiveness one, and because he was still half in, half out of all of this, and then he would yell at me, and so that gave me the way to try and approach this in a way that he could hear that. So that's where a lot of this came from, and I dedicated the book to him. He's since died, and I miss him. He had night terrors, and he also sleepwalked. And so he walked out of a window in the middle of the night. He was very dear to me. And so he was a great gift, because he was that person who was all those people from my childhood who were bought on this silly religious stuff and so forth. And so that, I think, it helped clarify my voice to get down to the authenticity of it. So
yeah. And with that, I mean, that tragedy that you've endured even just recently, I do feel like there's some spiritual stuff. People have a lot of spiritual questions. And in your book, I was really liking what you were writing. because I read this part more than the other parts, which I'm going to read it. I'll probably have to read the whole book again, to be honest. But 168, you said spiritual versus religious. This is the chapter. And you quoted Albert Einstein, and I did not realize he had said this. This is such a great quote by Albert Einstein. The religion of the future will be a cosmic religion. It should transcend a personal God and avoid dogmas and theology, covering both the natural and the spiritual. It should be based on a religious sense arising from the experience of all things, natural and spiritual, as a meaningful unity. Buddhism answers this description.
Yes.
I never knew he said that. It's incredible.
I like doing research. So.
Yeah, and some of the things, I've done podcasts on deconstructing religion, especially from the Christianity standpoint, which is the dominant religion in the United States. I've done 2 podcasts on that. One with a former pastor and one with somebody who grew up in the church so much that he didn't really know that there was anything outside of the church. Can you kind of talk about a little bit about the spiritual versus religious point? Because you go really in depth here, but I think for the listeners, I think it's important to, kind of discuss this a little bit.
Well, it comes out of growing up in a cult, who was Christian based, and we got daily misses from God.
Messages
directly from Mother. She was the direct conduit to God.
Okay.
So coming out of that and really realizing that all of this was just a fake thing. I mean, she genuinely believed it. I mean, there's no question that she heard voices and the whole thing. I mean, a lot of therapists have tried to diagnose her. And of course there gets schizophrenia and multiple personality disorder or things, but I actually think she was possessed by something. I mean, I think that was the only way that I can make sense out of what I know now and what I grew up with. So I was completely indoctrinated from the beginning that there is one truth. It was my mother's truth. And so in order to find my path back, I had to find something bigger. Something that was, and the whole point of Buddhism and the whole point of the New Age movement back in the 80s, dating myself, but it was really about getting curious. It was about exploring all these possibilities, and whether it was through trance channels or whatever modalities you were doing at the time, meditation and so forth, it was about just getting curious and see what the universe was when you tuned into it, to see what came out of that. And so I think the whole point of spirituality is about being open to question everything and being open to curious about everything. And you'll come to your own conclusions. You'll come to your own synthesis of that as you find your path. But to accept somebody else's truth as the absolute truth is to give away your power. It's to stop thinking. And then you're simply in a cult.
Yeah, well, and to give up control. And I think there's a concept. It's interesting because on one hand, we want to give up control, and that's where curiosity comes in. But I think a lot of people want to give up their control of thinking and having to do their own work. And the religion's
responsibility.
And religion's a perfect thing to join if that's what you want. There are a few costs, of course, depending on what sect you get into and money and all of that. But it was interesting that you said in here, there is this need to like over define God rather than, and which is limiting God rather than to expand the possibilities of our existence. This need, this kind of like focused, small human need to define a God is the urge to anthropomorphize the unknown, which is to basically make God, make a sort of human-esque figure or a Zeus-like figure, if I could be so bold. The unknown, the universe is unknown to us. As the James Webb satellite goes out, we are just more and more understanding how absolutely small we are and how the universe is so large, but yet things all go down to this nano level that we can't even conceptualize of. Ants have their own civilization that we have no real knowledge of other than some National Geographic videos from the 90s. Like intricately small, and then atoms and neutrons and electrons. We can't even conceptualize of this. And religion, a lot of religions and spiritualities from the olden days and now too, but back then especially, were to explain what was going on in the natural world around us. We had to make up a story about why was it raining here and sunny over there, and why was there an earthquake, and why was this volcano exploding, and why did these people die of this unknown thing? We didn't know what germs were, right? I mean, so bad spirits came and did this. It is all done in the spirit of reducing anxiety, which I think is huge, right? Because humans are naturally anxious. We have the negative bias. This is, of course, to keep us alive, but also can cause us to suffer if we focus too much. About unsolvable questions, and for most, putting those questions to rest. So the religion is putting the questions to rest. It is an attempt to stop or limit inquiry so that other less troubling things can be focused on. It encourages a focus more on things that are tangible, comprehensible, or controllable. And I think the hard part about that is that for a while, I think religion can relieve anxiety. I think believing a very fixed idea of the world or a God or whatever can really, for a short time, alleviate some of your fears of being human and some of the big human questions and existential questions we have to grapple with. But I do think there's a gnawing sense of a lot of people who are committed to the religion after so many years of being on the earth, as you get older, that a lot of these questions are not answered by the religion at all. And it's
not even addressed.
Not even addressed. Right? Just a way of framing it, right?
Yeah.
And basic questions are dismissed as a lack of faith or a lack of commitment or something's wrong with you, which in my mind is abuse, kind of like putting it back on the person for asking questions, What are your thoughts?
Well, I remember in the church, I'm a gay man. And I remember in the Baptist church, the minister one day after the service came up to me and said, if my son turned out to be like you, I'd kill him. I didn't even know I was gay at the time. This is before I had put the pieces together. And so, but that sort of encapsulated my experience in the Southern Baptist Church. That's extremely controlling. It's very narrowly focused. And that they're so busy trying to prove their quote unquote truth that they aren't seeing what's in front of them. And they're not interested. It's, again, I keep coming back to the concept of curiosity. I think the gift is never letting go of your curiosity. I keep learning more. I keep exploring and getting bigger paradigms and making more sense out of things. I mean, that was written several years ago at this point. And so my next book is actually my memoir. So I'm going to tell about my journey, which has been fascinating and unbelievable in so many ways. But it's really a journey of curiosity. And that I read voraciously as a child. That was my way of expanding the universe. And I particularly like biographies and seeing the world through other people's lenses. And I think that was really a big piece of how I became me. And I'm really grateful for that. And we don't read anymore, and we watch movies and think we understand everything. And so and movies are lovely. I like movies, but they don't generally really challenge us. And we have to challenge our assumptions. We have to challenge our truths. We have to go out there and blow them up and see how it all comes back together. And that's the fun.
I like that. Yes, that's very good. I'm excited. That's going to be your next book. I feel like, that's why this book currently, Facing the Truth of Your Life, that I'm going through is so interesting to me, because even if people don't identify with everything you're saying, I think that this gives them an opportunity to be curious about these concepts.
Yes. You
And
don't
I
have to come
love
to my
that.
conclusion. Come to your own. But at least have
Yes.
some thoughts about
And,
what the question is.
and you say that all over here. And on chapter 15, you say, "Oh, to be vulnerable." And this quote from Martha Beck, who I hadn't known about. Realizing that we've surrendered our self-esteem to others and choosing to be accountable for our own self-worth would mean absorbing the terrifying fact that we're always vulnerable to pain and loss.
Yes.
And pain and loss are part of life. And the Buddhists, I know, teach that. But I do think in a lot of religious traditions, especially American Christianity, pain and loss are glossed over. And as soon as somebody dies, they're in the arms of Jesus, and that's supposed to make you feel better, but they're not there anymore.
Or you give it all to Jesus or
Right.
or whoever, so you don't have to experience it. Well, that experience is what you're supposed to have, because that's going to make you you.
Right. and it's an inevitable part of living is loss and pain. And I think our culture takes the most prescription medications of any culture, and I'm for prescriptions, by the way. I think they're good, especially in the stressful world. You need them, but if you're taking them to avoid truths and work that you have to do, that's when they become not useful, right? When you're in a really bad place, you need a medication, right? Or if you're very stressed out or whatever. I'm talking about psychotropic medications, but we also take every other type of medication.
Well, I was going to say there's cocaine, marijuana, MDMA. I mean, LSD.
The amount of people eating their feelings, there's that. The amount of people that eat their feelings away and are on statins because they won't change their diet, and the statins are keeping them alive, or they would have died years ago. So we're anesthetizing the pain, and thus I think we prolong suffering even further.
It ages you, and it makes your life miserable, and you wonder why you're here. It's like, well, you're here to heal the pain.
Yes,
that's why you're here. So get busy.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I think that's a tough thing, because on one hand, I think there's a part of the United States culture that says work hard and you'll get somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. That sort of work, we need to really put ourselves out there, and we're a very expressive country. I mean, we dominate the music and movie industry. I mean, which is, whatever, I don't know what that means, but, we're very into expressing things and artistic things, but yet I don't understand, but it does seem like the main big part of our culture is trying to avoid the very truths you're talking about in this book. And I wonder what would happen if our culture went mainstream with some of these things, how we could change the world. I really wonder.
We would change the world, and we have that power, but we're squandering it because of our own unwillingness to face who we are.
Well, and that right there is kind of the point of the book. But just to give people concepts, every other page you introduce a knowledge is power concept, such as here you talk about finding our limitations. What about sensitivity? How do we view our parents? What do we do when something happens to us and we need to change our perspective? How do people cope? Victim identity disorder, we'll go back to that. How do you reconcile? What does healing mean? Asking for forgiveness, exercises, examples. So I just think this is a great book. I really would love for some graduate school to make their students read it, because I think these are things that veteran therapists, not all of them, but a lot of them get to this point at some point in their career where they kind of start understanding and putting these connections together. Not all of them, obviously, but these are things that, and you boil it down to a practical way to understand it, both for the person who's a regular person who's not in psychology and for the psychologist. So I really want to thank you for writing this book, and I'm very glad and honored to be able to keep it on my desk as a reference. And I hope that all the podcasts you're doing and media gets us to a larger audience over time.
Yeah, the one of my clients paid me, I thought, the highest compliment. He said, "This is like a really long Merle session."
Nice.
It is who I am in therapy. I mean, it's the truth that I bring to it, and with all the compassion and empathy that's appropriate. And so, can I speak to something? I don't know how much time we have.
We've got time.
But the thing that you talked about it in the beginning, we didn't really talk about much, was boundaries. And it's a really badly misunderstood thing in our world.
Yeah.
And it is really, really difficult for people to grasp them. And because we've made boundaries about what other people are doing to us. And boundaries are really about how we grew up. What I call our dance of intimacy. That in our family teaches us how to be in the world. And we assume that the way they are is the way the whole world works. And then we leave our family, go out into the world, and we get confused because they're not acting like our family. Or they are, and because that's how we marry our parents, because we go out there and look for that dance and like, oh, it's like we've known each other forever. You just found one of your parents.
Oh, God. Yeah.
And so I often say, you're going to marry your parent, just marry a healthier version. But so the first thing about boundaries is you have to get that it's about you. It's not about them. Because the literal definition of boundaries is where I stop and you start. And our whole world has been about merging. And whether it's compassion or empathy, I have to feel your feelings in order to have real empathy and compassion, which is absolute bullshit and the absolute worst possible thing you can do. I can't tell you how many times I went to somebody upset about something and they fall apart because they're so busy absorbing my feelings that they can't function. People do this all the time. And so the one piece is that it's just this understanding it's about you and what you bring to the world. But the other piece is that we're all energy. We're made up of atoms. And so until you understand how this energy works, and what call energetic boundaries, you can't really manipulate and handle boundaries. And so I cover all of that in the workshop that you call 7 Steps to Powerful Boundaries. So if you want to avoid burnout, if you want to avoid compassion fatigue, if you want to be alive at the end of the day, especially as a therapist, I can't tell you how many therapists have read this or taken my workshops and said, I have life at the end of the day. I said, yes, because you're not giving it all away. You're not absorbing all of this stuff from everybody, which is not good for you. It's not good for the clients. And once you learn how to hold that boundary and get far more information about what's going on with the client, because you aren't distorting it with what's going on inside of you. And this is true for families and so forth, and lovers and workplaces, and because people go to work and turn their bosses into their parents and try and work out their parental stuff on them.
Oh boy, it's true.
And they all recreate their families at work in one form or another, and they wonder why these big dysfunctional cesspools of mess. And so again, I've taken on challenging topic of something that people aren't supposed to know about and giving them tools to be so much more successful in the world. That literally changes their whole experience of being in the world. And the one that I talk about most in terms of merging is that their paradigm in relationship is about merging. Two shall be as one. Well, it's a great way to kill a relationship, and especially kill sex, because sex happens at the contact boundary. And the more you merge, the more you kill the sexual excitement.
Yeah.
So if you really want to keep the energy alive in your relationship, don't merge. And I tell you how to not do that in the workshop. And the first section of it is really about doing your own personal work.
Yeah.
And I make people make a list. I have them make them make a list of how the people in your life growing up as a child who said they loved you but treated you badly.
Oh my God. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, I'm really
long
mean.
list.
I'm really mean. and I said, it's because what they don't understand, and so I get deep into this concept of shame and guilt and how these use manipulate is that shame is taking on the belief that you're bad. And so when kids are sexually abused, they believe that it's their fault.
Yes.
Because they're the center of the universe and it's all about them.
The egocentrism,
And,
right.
Yes. And so, which is a problem because that's where they're at.
Right.
But then they take that out into the world and say, well, I'm sick, I'm twisted, I'm a whore, I'm whatever, because they're acting out the pain from this. And so once they understand that they absorbed the shame from the perpetrator, and it's not their shame, and that they didn't do anything wrong. So then heal that shame. It changes the whole way of being in the world. And so, but all of this comes back to boundaries. And so that's why I have put all this together.
And this is the workshop you're talking about, unspokenboundaries.com.
Yes.
And the 7 steps to powerful boundaries. Be an advocate for yourself. And honestly, I've been in the mental health field for, oh boy, I want to say 17 years now. And not as long as you have, but I'm getting there. And one of the biggest things that keeps smacking me in the face is that both clients and therapists have trouble with boundaries. I mean, us therapists, luckily, are bound by this ethics codes, and the state laws.
Most of us.
Well, we should be, right?
Yes.
We have that kind of gavel hanging over our head to bash us if we misbehave. But it's these subtle boundaries that therapists are letting get crossed every day in their personal lives, with clients, at work, managers, even the way they respond to email and text messages. And obviously clients have, they're coming in. They probably, everyone has things go on in their life, but most clients haven't been taught boundaries either. And so as a therapist, we need to model these boundaries. So I actually, is this workshop for anybody? Anybody can go?
All the above. Anybody can take it.
I love that. So I think that's a missing thing. There's only been a couple books on boundaries that I've actually seen out there that were worth anything. But I actually like, I actually like that you're doing this, because I feel like you're hitting a missing piece. It's not just how you set the boundaries or where you set the boundaries, which is that a lot of the books are about. It's about knowing why you didn't have boundaries or why you're averse to setting boundaries.
Yeah, you first have to understand where you came from before you can then move forward. And our families are not set up for boundaries. I've seen families where they're extraordinary. The kids are unbelievable, but they're the exception to the rule.
Yes.
Because love in families is conditional for the most part. And they use that to control you. So if you're who I want you to be or act the way I want you to do, then I'm going to love you. And if you don't do that, I'm not going to love you. So that's abuse. Pure and simple. But that's the normal parenting.
It is.
And that is a boundary. And so once you understand that the parents have crossed the boundary there, that changes everything.
Well, yeah. And so I'm excited for people to find out about this. Just because of time, we got to start wrapping up here. But I think we can, I'm going to put all of your websites in the show notes.
Great.
Unspokenboundaries.com and merleyost.com.
Yes.
And people can get your books from your websites. Where else can they find your books?
They're all, the first 4 are really out of press.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there are used copies out there. If they can go to Amazon, look for it, they can find them.
Yeah.
The first two are How to Be a Good Manager. My first original profession was in management, and so my co-author and I, the first 3 are co-authored, realized that in the 50s, when you went into a job, they mentored you. They gave you somebody to mentor you and know how to be a manager. But now when you go to work, you just get thrown out into the front lines and expected you're going to automatically know how to manage. And so we wrote a book that would be that good uncle or that good mentor to tell you the rules of management.
Yes.
We wanted to call it a survival guide for managers. But McGraw-Hill, in all of his wisdom, saw these two guys in California. Oh, it's this new age stuff. So they wanted to call it Meditations for Managers. And we said, not a fucking chance in the world. So our compromise was to call it Reflections for Managers. But it would have sold much better. It did. That was the first one was a bestseller, so it did fine. But it would have been a much better seller if they had called it Survival Guide for Managers.
Right.
But and then the third one's How to Be a Good Employee. The fourth one is on. I did an anthology. I edited an anthology called When Love Lasts Forever. It's about long-term gay male couples together from 10 to 45 years, and it tells their story. And then book 5 is on gynecomastia. I had adolescent onset gynecomastia. I have a worldwide reputation. I've been in documentaries for Channel 4 and BBC. Australia came over, a TV show came over, filmed my last surgery. And I've gotten newspapers and magazines around the world for that. So I know a lot about gynecomastia. Do you know what gynecomastia is?
I've heard about it. It's something to do with something in your chest cavity.
Yeah, males developing female-like breast.
Oh, okay.
That's all it is. It's a liver issue. At adolescence, your body gets over. You suddenly get this surge of testosterone, and if your liver has not geared up to process the testosterone, which is what it does, then the excess testosterone gets converted to estrogen.
Oh,
and for a certain percentage of boys, you're going to develop breast because you're predisposition. There's plenty of women out there without any breast, and so you have to have this predisposition. And an adult onset is more often caused by alcoholism, anything that impairs the liver.
I see.
So it's a liver issue. And so, but as a 12-year-old boy developing breast, that was really kind of traumatic. And a skinny little guy, boom. And so I had 2 breast reductions. And after my first one, I starting my internship. And so I created a website, and I put a section on there about gynecomastia, and it blew up. And I was getting 100,000 hits a month and visits. And so I put it in this whole website called gynecomastia.org and made a lot of money off that for a number of years. Then I sold it because I got tired of dealing with the children plastic surgery. And so like, he said bad things about me, or he told my picture. I was like, oh my no. God. And so I just said, I had enough of this. And then the last book, of course, you were just talking about Facing the Truth of Your Life, which I'm very proud of. And there's a lot of people who really dislike it.
Well, I think, the sign of a good book is that you both have a lot of love and a lot of hate. That's what I've always
there's
said.
Definitely people who said it changed their life. I mean, and if you really take it to heart and you really practice this, it's going to profoundly impact how you are in the world. And what more can I ask for? I mean, because we don't learn any of this stuff in childhood for most part. So somebody has to tell us, but you have to be open to hearing it as well.
I agree. And I think that's what I would call a balanced approach to bringing up hard things. Is the balance has to be both the empathy and the compassion, but also the responsibility. And I think that's you strike a good balance, I think, in this book, Ready for Action.
Thank you.
So
thank you so much.
Because you can feel the compassion in your writing, but I also feel like you're like, damn it, don't let this wreck your life. Like, get out there. Like, you want people to thrive and love and just get out there. That's apparent throughout the book.
It's so, I mean, I had to work really hard to have my best life. Yeah. And I know it's doable.
Yes, it is. It's doable. Hard. It's hard, but it's definitely doable because, you put your mind to it. And the worst part is that it's not just something you can externalize. Like you said, the hardest part is that you really have to do that introspective work and calling yourself out. And that is tough. And that's the truth, right? We all have those shortcomings. So I'm excited for people to hear this podcast. So I appreciate all of your time, Merle.
Well, thank you so very much. I really enjoyed this. And I think you're one of the first people who actually read the book. So I'm really grateful because you've discussed this in far more depth than anybody who's interviewed me about all of this. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, Merle. My pleasure.
sun so gray that my feet get cold. Haven't you read there's a summer wind gets my head in I'll be that name but you come to claim it too hard. All upon a face where they lost and strange is too hard to
And there you have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician podcast. If you're enjoying this show, please share it with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. Or take just a minute to give us a rating on iTunes. As most of you know, I am passionate about preventing future violence in the United States. My colleagues and I have started a nonprofit called the National Violence Prevention Hotline, a 501c3 organization. We are endeavoring to gain funding and collaborators so that we can start a 24/7 hotline and chat line to reach potential perpetrators before they act violently. It is a bold effort to save lives and curb violence by working to connect with potential offenders while they are in the planning stages of violence, help to de-escalate them, and provide resources so that they can get appropriate professional help. The National Violence Prevention Hotline is looking to open up a conversation about violence in society, the causes, and the solutions. You can learn more by visiting our website, www.violencepreventionhotline.org. Join us online by signing our petition on the website, sharing the website with your network of people, donating to the cause if you like, and you can now even write your congressperson from our website with a simple form. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you are a therapist looking for ethical and excellent medical billing services, check out therapistbillingservicesllc.com. That's www.therapistbillingservicesllc.com. Billing services created by therapists for therapists. If you're looking for an EMDR International Association consultant, I am a consultant and I can provide you the 20 hours you need to become EMDRIA certified. I have groups online and in person, and I do individual consultation. Just send me a message at the website and I'll get back to you. If you want to get trained in EMDR therapy, check out the great training opportunities with EMDR Training Solutions. I've worked with them before and they are phenomenal, so register today. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment at a local counseling center in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area at Health for Life Counseling and the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based on the literature they have read and the experience in their fields, this should not be viewed as a definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you're in a crisis, please dial 911 or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988. You can also text 741-741 and a live trained crisis counselor will respond. Did you know you could support your local bookstore by shopping at www.bookshop.org? You can order from the comfort of your own home online while supporting local brick and mortar businesses near you. If you are a therapist and you are not a member of your national or local therapy organizations such as the American Counseling Association or the American Mental Health Counselors Association, please get involved, at least pay the dues. It will help the lobbyists in our field keep us from becoming gig workers. And of course, there's the bonus of increasing mental health education around the United States and helping people understand what counseling is and promoting best practices within our profession. Until next time, I wish you all a safe and peaceful week.